we are going to discuss something which is very basic to the photography. And if we talk about photography, we are talking about light. And everything that we change is actually controlling the light or the amount of light that falls onto the sensor of your camera. So the next slide is I'm going to talk about three very basic things which are there in every camera which is there in the market, whether it is your mobile camera or your DSLR or mirrorless camera or any other point and shoot cameras or any other sort of cameras. So those three settings, they're called aperture, shutter speed, and ISO sensitivity. And if you see at the heart of this triangle, we have light. So everything is controlling the light. And there are some other functions of these three entities, but we are not going to discuss them straight away. First of all, we are going to discuss how they are controlling the light. Okay, if we talk about aperture, aperture is something which is inside the lens. And shutter speed and ISO sensitivity, these are two things which are inside the camera. So if you know what I mean, that DSLRs, they have detachable lenses. So if you change the lens, you can have the minimum value of aperture for different lenses. For example, if we talk about Nikon Z6, so it comes with the lens, the kit lens, which has the minimum value of f4. So f4 is aperture. So we are going to talk about what these values mean, f-stop values. And for the time being, you can just remember that everything which is written with f, that is the value of the aperture. That is the minimum value of the aperture. It can go beyond that value. And if we talk about shutter speed, so shutter speed is the amount of time when your sensor is exposed to the light and the shutter is released and the shutter is not in front of the sensor. Okay. And once the light falls on the sensor, then this ISO sensitivity comes into play. Okay. So let me show you with a diagram what I'm talking about. So do you see this, how digital camera works?
I see that.
Okay.
Wow.
So this is a picture of a typical DSLR camera. So if you talk about mirrorless camera, so if you see this pentaprism and then there is a mirror, that blue line is actually a mirror. And if you go above, then that is the pentaprism. So in the modern cameras, which are called mirrorless cameras, you don't have these two elements. So what happens when you don't have these two elements? The weight of the camera reduces a great deal. Okay, so let's talk about how the light travels inside the camera and how do you see it. So if we talk about this DSLR camera, so light is coming from the right side. So this yellow is actually the light. So when it enters the lens, the first thing is the lens, and we have so many lens elements. If you see this light blue color, these are the lens elements. So it's not just one lens inside the lens. So mostly the lenses have like 9 lens elements, 11 lens elements. So all of them, what they do, they point your light towards the sensor, which is the red line in the left corner or in the left side, on the left side. So the light enters the lens, and if you see one ring here, which is gray in color, so this is where the aperture is. So this opening of this ring is called the aperture. So if you have very large value of f-stop, for example, f22, it means the opening is very small. And if you have very small values of aperture, for example, f1.8, it means your opening of this lens is quite wide open. Okay, so it is like inversely related to each other. F-stop, large value, opening is small. F-stop, small value, opening is quite large. Okay, so what will happen if the opening is too small? So this is where I want to engage you as well. So think of a pipe of water. So what will happen if the diameter of that pipe is very small? So how much amount of water will pass through that as compared to a pipe where we have, the diameter is quite high or quite large. So how will it work? So can you just answer?
Yeah, it'll be very little water.
Yeah, because the opening is quite small. So this is how the camera also works. If the opening is small, the amount of light that passes through that aperture is quite small. Okay. Okay. So that is the first thing. Okay. Next thing is if we talk about shutter, because I mentioned shutter speed as well. So shutter, if you see this black line in front of this red line, so this is the shutter. It is just like the shutter of a shop. So have you seen where, in the morning, a guy comes and he just opens the shutter of a shop. So what happens? People can go in. So same happens here. If the shutter is open or the shutter is not in front of your sensor, so the light is going to hit the sensor. So sensor is something which is actually acting like your eye, and it is making the picture. So everything which is happening here, so we are doing exactly that. We are trying to make sure the light hits the sensor. So the first thing was aperture. Then when you click the shutter release button, which is the button that you click to take a photograph. So when you click that, what you are essentially doing is that, let me just turn on the pointer if you can see. Okay, so what will happen when you click this shutter release button here? So this mirror will go flat. Okay, okay, let me just see if I can just write it. So at the moment, it is something like this. But when you click this shutter release button, it will go flat like this.
Mm.
When it goes flat and this shutter rolls up here, so the light travels straight and hits the sensor, right?
Mm.
Okay, this is the time when you cannot see through your viewfinder the scene, because the light was coming here, it was hitting this mirror, and then it was being reflected and coming out of this viewfinder. Now you cannot see it as long
Mm.
as you have this shutter release button clicked. Okay, but now the picture will be um, printed onto this sensor. Okay, once the light hits the sensor, because we have seen, okay, what shutter does, it just rolls up, but how it rolls up, it depends on how much shutter speed you have set. For example, if I have set something around 1/2, so it is measured in seconds. So if I have set it to 1.1/2, which means 0.5 seconds, so it will be rolled up for that amount of time, 0.5 seconds. But if
Mm.
I set it to 1/50, so now it means the shutter speed is quite fast as compared to 1/2. So this will go up, and as soon as this time is up 1/50, this shutter goes down again. And you can see here when this value is quite fast, which means 1/50, it means the small amount of light will be able to hit the sensor because the time is very small for that light to hit the sensor. Okay, so this is how the shutter speed is controlling the light. So if the value is quite fast, which is 1/50, then small amount of light will hit the sensor. Okay, now let's talk about sensor sensitivity, ISO sensitivity, which we know by this name. So ISO sensitivity is the sensitivity of the sensor. Okay, what does that mean? When the light hits the sensor, it stimulates the particles in the sensor, or what we called as pixels in the sensor. And every pixel, then if that is the RGB camera, which has red, blue, and green. So every pixel, depending on how much amount of light is falling onto that, will try to catch that light. And that depends on what is the ISO sensitivity of that sensor. So if the ISO sensitivity, you have set it to high value, it means at that time, the sensor is very sensitive to the light. And for example, you have set it to 1000 as compared to 100. At 1000, it will show you that same scene quite bright as compared to 100. Okay, but there are some downsides. We are going to discuss those downsides as well, because they are controlling the light, but they have advantages and they have some downsides as well associated with them. Okay, I hope you have understood this principle of digital camera, right?
Yeah, it's you teach very well. This is amazing. I had heard the terms before. The way you put it, it's very simple. It's yeah.
Okay,
I
that's
feel
great.
like I have a DSLR that I haven't used in years, and now I'm thinking, huh, I wanna start playing with it again.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Okay, next up is Aperture. Let's discuss it in a bit more detail, because it's not the light only which is controlled by the aperture. There are some few other things as well. The picture at the bottom left, uh, these are the blades. When you set the f-stop values, which is the aperture, so these blades either come together or they become far apart from each other. So maybe the picture on the left, what I can guess from the work I generally do is maybe it is f11 or maybe f13 or somewhere there. And the picture on the right, it might be f2 or something like that. Okay. So what will happen if we set something to f11 or f2? So have you heard about bokeh effect?
No.
Okay. The bokeh effect is um, if you have seen some portraits in the night, for example, so the lights behind the person, they are more like big circles of light, or
Hmm.
something like yellow lights or something like that. So that
Yeah.
blurring of the background is called bokeh effect. So this aperture is the primary setting which is used to attain that bokeh effect. So how does it work? For example, I'm taking a picture of a person. So what I will do, I will try to focus only on that person, and everything behind that person, I want to blur it. So I will set the value of f-stop as low as I can. For example, if I have f1.8, that is the lowest value of my lens. So I will set it to 1.8. If I have 1.2 or something. But there is some trade-off as well. Generally, what we see that generally we should set it to the lowest value, but the lenses, they have some sweet spot as well. Maybe if you have the lens which can go down to 1.8, maybe you can set it to 2.8 or something, because you don't want to only focus on your eyes. You want to see the facial other facial features as well, maybe the ears and all other features, maybe the hair of that person as well. So primarily, when you want to achieve this bokeh effect, you should go with the low values. But if we talk about if we want something which has everything tack sharp, like in the foreground and in the background, for example, all the landscape pictures. So I will set the value to very large value, maybe f16 or something like that, because
Hmm.
everything, maybe the flowers in the foreground and the trees in the background, I want everything to be sharp. Okay, so this is where aperture is very, very important. But when once you set the aperture very high, because now you're making sure the light that comes in is quite small, but everything will be sharp. But once you set this aperture to very large value, it means that you have to trade it off with maybe shutter speed or maybe ISO sensitivity. So ISO is something we do not recommend it to go beyond maybe 400 or 800, except during the night, because once you add ISO, it will have some adverse effects as well. So
Mm.
what I recommend generally when you're taking a picture of a landscape, you should use a tripod or some other rest so that you can play with the shutter speed. Okay.
Mm.
And depth of field, this is one more important term. And what it means is, for example, I have a camera here. I hope you can see what I'm drawing as well.
Yeah,
And
I can.
I have a person here as well. My drawing is very bad, so don't worry about it. And I have a tree at the background. So what does depth of field means? That, for example, I have focused on this person. So everything in between that person and camera, or everything beyond that person, will has decreased sharpness. And if I go further away and if I move towards that tree, it will has the lowest sharpness as compared to this person.
Mm-hmm.
And this is called depth of field. So everything which falls on this plane, which where this person is located, will be tag sharp, because I've set f-stop to very small value. But as long as I go further, it will have some sharpness issues, and it will keep on decreasing as I go further. Okay, so this is one comparison of how this is working. For example, at the left side, if you see this coin, it is sharp, but everything behind this coin, you cannot make sense of it. But as you move towards the right, if you go to F16, so you can see, okay, this is a door behind this coin, because now,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, things are getting sharp. Okay, but now if you want to achieve this bokeh effect, you need to go down to this range on the left. Okay.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
Next up is shutter speed. I have already told you, if you set it too fast, small amount of light will come in and hit the sensor. But if you set it to small value, then you will have um, more light, but there will be some effects associated with this one. For example, you are somewhere where you are watching a soccer game, and you want to make sure that, okay, you want to take pictures of the players while they are playing. So if the person is running, you need to make sure that you set your shutter speed according to that value, because running is
Mm.
associated, or the distance is associated with how much um, time or velocity and all those things, if you talk about physics. So you want to make sure that you set your ISO, or sorry, your shutter speed to quite fast value, maybe 1/500, so that everything about that person is sharp. But if you shoot at 1/15 or maybe 1/3 of a second, then you cannot make sense of that person. I hope you understand what I'm trying to tell you here.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
totally.
okay, great. So shutter speed, apart from the light it controls, it has this use as well, where you want to freeze the action, then you will try to make shutter speed as high as possible. And generally what we do, if your lens has the what do you call it, focal length of 50 millimeter, for example, maybe you have the lens, and at the top of that lens it is written that, okay, the value of the focal length is 50 millimeter. So what you want to do, you want to set your shutter speed at least to 1/100, double double the amount of your focal length. And you can go beyond that, maybe 1/500 or something like that. But generally what we recommend is that do not go below this, or smaller value as compared to this, because when you have small shutter speed, your own shake of your hand will also cause some issues as well, because now you're holding the camera, but during the picture your hands can also shake, or even when the mirror inside that camera is moving, that also produces some shake as well, right? So if you're using a remote control, that is the best way of doing it. Okay, so this is how shutter speed works. You can see as I'm increasing the shutter speed, the amount of light is decreasing. But if we talk about action, maybe, okay, if we talk about this picture here, and if I have the value as low as 1/10, you can see I cannot make sense of her hands. But as I go to 1/160, now she is also waving her hands, but I can make some sense out of that. And if I want to make more sense out of that, I can go beyond that, maybe 1/250, or maybe 1/500 or something like that. Okay. So next up is ISO sensitivity, and this is the last thing we are going to discuss. And then in the next week, we are going to discuss more. So ISO sensitivity, now the problem with ISO sensitivity is that if I increase the value of ISO sensitivity, so you can see here, there is some noise in the picture, especially, yeah. So this is what happens. So the picture gets grainy when you increase the value of ISO sensitivity, but the picture also gets quite bright as well. So generally during the night photography, then you have to find that trade-off as well. For example, in the modern mirrorless cameras, I have worked on 10,000 ISO as well, and still the images were quite usable. But if I talk about my mirrorless camera, I cannot go beyond 1,000, even during the night. That picture is quite crappy. So this is where you have to make a decision, whether you want to increase the ISO, or you want to lower your shutter speed, or maybe you want to lower the aperture. So this trade-off we are going to discuss in the next classes as well. So this is another picture where I'm showing, okay, 100, the light is quite small, but the picture does not have any noise. But if you go to 1,000, you can see this is a picture of my DSLR. The light is there, but you can see a lot of noise here. So we will discuss how we can trade off these things in the next class. So if you have any questions, I'm
This
here
is
to answer.
wonderful.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
this is great. Wow, this is great education. I'm excited for next class. And how you're going to show us some images and how people can start learning how to use their own cameras, even if they have their phones,
Yeah,
even
that's right.
mobiles, to take landscape photos and other types of photos using your techniques.
Yeah, it can work on mobile cameras, because in modern mobile cameras, we have the pro modes as well. So you can control few things. You cannot control everything, but you can control few things.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Naeem.